Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving into the absolutely wild history of one church in Thrissur, India. It's a story that spans 100 years, and it's all about conflict, power, and this relentless, desperate search for a leader.
And let's just kick things off with this quote from our source because, wow, it really sets the stage. It suggests that for this community, suing each other was practically a hobby. So yeah, this isn't a story about quiet prayer. It's about fierce courtroom battles and a community constantly at war with itself.
So where does this all start? Well, our story really gets going in the late 18th century. A king sets up a new Christian community, gives them land, and they build a church. But there's one huge thing missing, a bishop of their own. And this leadership vacuum, it becomes the central obsession, the main conflict for the next 100 years.
What's so important to see here is how this timeline just lays out the core motivation for everything that comes next. You see, the community gets founded in 1796. By 1814, they have their beautiful church, but for decades, they're just waiting, wanting a bishop from their own East Syrian tradition. So when one finally arrives in 1861, you think that's the end of the story, right? Nope, it's the beginning of a whole new level of struggle.
Yeah, that bishop's arrival didn't bring peace and harmony. Not even close. Instead, it basically lit a fuse, igniting this firestorm of feuds and controversies that reached all the way from their small parishes in India to the grand halls of the Vatican itself.
And right in the middle of this whole storm, you have this one guy, Patriarch Joseph Ado VI. Our source describes him as being in a long and bitter feud with the Vatican. I mean, this guy was caught in a totally impossible spot, trying to do right by his people in India while constantly butting heads with the Pope in Rome. And you can really see his rebellious streak right here. He sends a bishop to India, completely ignoring Rome's orders. Then he goes to the First Vatican Council and very publicly opposes the whole doctrine of papal infallibility. And then, just a few years later, he does it again. He sends another bishop without permission and gets himself excommunicated. The bottom line is, this patriarch repeatedly chose his flock over the Vatican's rules, and that just paved the way for decades of absolute chaos.
And all this disobedience led to a series of events that are honestly almost hard to believe. What came next was this crazy revolving door of bishops who were sent over, immediately rejected, sometimes excommunicated, and in one case, even kidnapped.
Okay, first up, Marcos in 1861. He's the very first bishop the patriarch sends. He gets to India, and he's met with just fierce opposition from a rival group. They literally put him on a boat and shipped him right back to Mesopotamia. Talk about a warm welcome.
And then you have the just tragic story of Mar Abdasho. He was a young priest that the community itself sent to become their bishop. He gets consecrated, comes back home in 1863, and is then rejected by the very same people who sent him. They forced him to shave his beard, which was the sign of his rank, and he had to go back to being a simple parish priest. Just heartbreaking.
Okay, next up is Mar Melis. He shows up in 1874 and actually brings a little bit of stability. He even recognizes the demoted Mar Abdasho and leads the community pretty successfully for 8 years. But of course, it doesn't last. The renegade patriarch dies, his successor recalls Mar Melis, and boom, the community is right back where they started, with no leader.
And just when you think it can't get any weirder, get this. In 1875, another bishop, Mar Jacob, gets into a theological debate with a rival. And what happens? The rival literally kidnaps him and sends him packing. No, seriously, kidnapped. I guess that's one way to win an argument.
So with all this chaos and instability, where did they turn to settle things? Not the church, no, the courtroom. In 1911, a church administrator sued a brand new bishop, kicking off a legal battle that dragged on for a staggering 14 years. And this wasn't a one-off thing. This was just how they did business. Now, as we get into the 20th century, the nature of the conflict starts to change. The fight is no longer just against outside forces like the Vatican. It becomes this deep internal split, a schism that literally tears the church in two.
And this is the Great Split of 1964. You've got two sides. The old calendarists were against the idea that leadership should be a family birthright, passed down from uncle to nephew. On the other side, the new calendarists defended it. Throw in a fight over which calendar to use, and you've got the perfect recipe for a full-blown schism. And you guessed it, a whole lot more lawsuits.
So how did they ever fix this?
Well, it was a long, hard road. We're talking decades of negotiations and legal fights. A huge turning point was in 1991, when a new patriarch, one who was not from the hereditary line, came to visit and help make peace. And finally, in 1995, after more than 30 years of being split, they officially came back together.
Okay, so after 100 years of bishops being deported, kidnapped, sued, and whole communities splitting in two, what's the big takeaway here? What does all this chaos really mean?
Well, our source suggests something pretty profound. This wild, messy story isn't just a weird, isolated case. It's actually a microcosm, a little picture of a theme that you see running through so much of church history, and maybe all of human history.
Because when you strip it all down, the author argues that these fights weren't really about faith or theology. They were about very, very human things: power, property, authority, and, as the source puts it, big egos. This was a story driven, more than anything, by a basic human hunger for control.
And that leaves us with this final, really provocative question. This whole story makes you wonder how much of history, whether it's sacred or secular, can just be boiled down to bishop versus bishop, or, to put it another way, powerful people fighting other powerful people. It's a lens that kind of changes how you see not just this one church's incredible story, but the very engine that makes history turn.